I'm just delighted to be able to have a chat with Matt Zerker today, founder, CEO, Tethr. We're really keen to hear a little bit about that. But I thought, in terms of a bit of a bio, Matt, it'd be great if you could just kind of intro yourself and maybe give us a sense of maybe what brought you to Tethr.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to do this. Wish we could be doing this in person. Of course, current circumstances prevent that. I came to Tethr very honestly. I came to it from my own struggles with mental health, depression, with suicidality and debilitating anxiety. I was originally in the finance world. So after I graduated university, I joined a company that then became a multi-asset hedge fund that managed assets using quantitative strategies. I did my CFA, started climbing that corporate ladder, became a portfolio manager, was making pretty good coin, but there was always something sort of hollow and missing for me in that world, and I didn't really know what it was. And for a long time, I thought it was something missing actually in my personal life. So I wasn't even looking at work as a reason why I was feeling so unsatisfied, disconnected, depressed, all of that stuff. And then what really was the major catalyst in my life is in January 2018, one of my best friends suddenly passed away at the age of 30. He had pneumonia at that point, but a lot of guys recover from pneumonia. It's not a huge deal typically at 30, but he also had this clotting condition that had been unrecognized, and he had a pulmonary embolism and literally dropped dead one day. And it was one of those moments where I think people can go kind of one of two directions. They can either go, I'm just going to live every day like it's my last, and it actually, after the grief is processed, it can really invigorate them. Or you can go down the path of what does it all mean, and there's nothingness, and life doesn't mean anything, and blah blah blah, and why are we all here? And I very distinctly took that second path. I would like to say that I was like eternally optimistic and living every day as my last, but I went to a very dark place after my friend passed away. And that was where, I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I was perpetually depressed, perpetually anxious, suicidal for a long period of time. And then I went down the path of really exploring every avenue. I went down the path of therapy. I went down the path of medication. I went down the path of psychedelics. I went down the path of energy work. If you know of a treatment that can be used for anxiety and depression, odds are I've actually tried it, and nothing was really working for me. And then I was at a really particularly bad state. I'd taken a leave of absence in November of 2018. And I couldn't work at this point. I was so completely debilitated. And one of my friends, actually, who was training to be a therapist at the time, asked me if I wanted to join a men's group. And I said, okay, sure. I mean, like, I've tried everything at this point. Why not give it a go? And I went, and something really profound happened that night. There was a shift that I could feel within myself that actually occurred that night. And I had grown up and I was bullied a lot as a kid, and that always sort of stayed with me. But in that moment, I was surrounded by a group of men, and they weren't trying to fix my problems. I literally just said, like, I'm not okay right now, and I don't see a point in actually going on with life. And instead of trying to say, oh no, you're great, and let's keep going, and maybe you just need to go to the gym a few times a week, they just simply held space for that. And they said, thank you for coming, we love you, and we're honored that you would share so openly and so vulnerably with us. And it was just different. I don't know what that is, but like being seen as the person that I am, as opposed to them sort of denying that and telling me, oh well, you should just go do this and everything will be fine. There was something profoundly healing in that. So I kept going to that men's group. The next year, I actually ended up going to a retreat through an organization called Everyman down in the United States. And on that, like, the doors just completely got blown open. This was much more intensive, deep, interpersonal work, one-on-one group work, all of that kind of stuff. It really changed the way that I was feeling in a pretty profound way. That's not to say that, the anxiety, the depression, the struggles weren't there, but it really shifted me and it really opened my heart. I actually came back on the Monday from that retreat and I quit my job on the Wednesday. And this is kind of what I've been doing ever since. Tethr kind of came out of a few conversations that I had with people, but I really realized the profound necessity to give men in our society permission to start having these open conversations and supporting each other, not fixing each other's problems, but simply holding space for whatever's coming up for people. I just realized that the profound utility and necessity of that in our modern society, that's being heightened right now, in my personal opinion. And so what we want to do with Tethr is we want to create a peer-to-peer support community where men feel like they're in a container or in a space where it is safe and comfortable and they feel like they can open up. So that's kind of my journey in a nutshell, and how I came to Tethr.
Thanks for sharing that. A couple of things, just if you wouldn't mind elaborating on. I talk to a lot of guys about transition, like they go through transitions. And I think grief is one of those transitions. It's interesting, you position the death of a friend as a kind of an epiphany. And I wonder, in reflecting back on that, how other guys might think about these catastrophic events that happen in their life, and how at some level grief is just, it can be so complicated, can't it?
Oh, for sure. And I don't think that we react the same to grief. And I think it can have very different impacts. And I think it also depends on the relationship too, that can dictate things. I never really struggled with denial about what was going on. I had fully accepted that my friend was gone, and that, it wasn't coming back. But what really I struggled with was, why is this happening? Right? Like, this shouldn't have happened in my life. This guy shouldn't be gone. I shouldn't have lost him. I guess that is denial in a form in and of itself. I never really dissociated from the situation. I was very present throughout it. I think it's a fork in the road, right? And a lot of people will go down that path of saying, well, I'm going to finally quit smoking. I'm going to finally quit the job that I never liked. Or you can kind of go to another place where you start to, deal with your own mortality and it becomes an existential crisis of sorts. This is what I hate about telling these types of stories, is because when I tell it in a 3-minute segment, it seems so linear. And it is so messy. And that's kind of the big thing that I want to tell people is like, yeah, if I tell the story now with a year and a half's 2020 hindsight, or 2 years 2020 hindsight, it seems like a very logical path. Well, that I would go through grief and then, this, and I would feel this way and I would move through that. But at the time it was crippling. I remember just like standing on my balcony, looking over the edge and wondering if that was a good idea. It's hopeless. There was multiple, frantic calls to friends and family and therapists and stuff like that. And so it's very messy, right? It is a very, very messy process. But one thing that I do want to say about that is that not only is it important to find a community that can help support you through that process, but, friends, family, practitioners, therapists, psychologists. I leaned on everything. And then at some point it becomes your personal journey. At some point, other people can't do the healing work for you. There has to be a willingness to sit in some of the discomfort, to confront. And that's been, I think, the biggest journey for me, has been confronting parts of myself that I would rather think that they're not there, or feelings that I've had that I've always tried to push away. I've always tried to push away uncomfortable feelings because I always felt like I was in danger, or there was a threat, or I didn't feel safe with them. And probably the biggest part of my journey from the point of my friend's death has actually been being able to now sit with pieces of myself, or thoughts or fears or things like that previously I didn't even want to go to that space. And what's super interesting is once you sit and confront and become friends with those aspects of your personality, fears, shame, guilt, remorse, it actually starts to transform. And I think that's when we really start to transform, is when we accept certain things, face it, and then say, well, what does this part of me actually really need? And for, I think, a lot of fear, especially, which is what I profoundly felt when my friend passed away, is like, what the heck is going to happen to me? Once I actually leaned into that, I could actually start to provide myself with a modicum of comfort myself. And that was the big transition, is knowing and finally realizing that all of the things that you need from other people, you can actually give to yourself if you're willing to sit with things. So that was kind of my process with grief. And I think it's an intensely personal process for everybody. And so how I'm going through it, I would urge men that are also going through this process, don't just look at my story and say, oh, well, it has to look like that. I've done that for a long, long, long time, where it's like, if I wasn't, working out 3 times a week within 3 weeks of this happening, then somehow I was behind schedule. It's really not like that. It is totally your own schedule.
Yeah, they're good points for sure. One of the other things that you mentioned in the introduction there, which I think is really helpful for guys, sounds like you don't ask for help just once. It sounds like something that is kind of a bit of a trial and error. It's about finding the right fit. It's about working your way through the options. And I think that's a really valuable message, because we often position it as guys kind of like just ask for help. And it's clearly not that simple, is it?
No, it's not. And I have a lot of guys that reach out to me now because of what I'm doing. And they say stuff like, oh, well, I did this once and it didn't work, so I'm not going to do it again. And of course, I mean, that, that is our instinct, but that's fear. That's fear of being hurt. That's feeling like, well, it's not working for me. And so there's there's a really nice, juicy complex about not being good enough, right? Or not deserving support, or not feeling like you're enough to get the support that you need. I have this theory, and I'm not a doctor, this is just my own personal theory, but I think at the core of all of us, there is a wounded boy that at some point did not get their needs met and is really just crying out to get very basic needs met, whether that's love, whether that's attention, whether that's compassion. I think, and there's actually an image that's going on around right now where it's the face of a man. Below that, it's anger. Below that, the guy's crying. And then within that, there's just a little boy huddled in the corner. And I think it's just such a perfect image. I really think that that is at the core of it. But there were so many times when I reached out to people in a frantic state, and as soon as I got off the phone, I wanted to kill myself because, and not in like, it just like the shame of what I had said was just so deep. I was like, how could you have possibly said that to that person? How could you have possibly been that vulnerable? And I think there's a bit of a desensitization process that needs to come along with it. But then it's also about finding the people that can actually hold space for you. And I think that's the most important part, is not everybody is going to be able to hold space for you. Because they're not going to be emotionally equipped to do it. So it's about finding those people that can be your allies. It's also about having the conversation up front before you speak with them. So one of the things that I did that I think looking back now I could have done differently, and I'm trying to do differently in my own life, is saying, hey, I want to talk to you, and there's going to be some stuff that comes up. Right? So it might get a little heavy. Are you okay having this conversation? Because one of the things that I found is if I was just calling people and dumping all of my stuff onto them, it's kind of like they were like, whoa, I did not sign up for this in any way. Our pain makes us into incredibly selfish people in a lot of ways because we just want that pain to go away. And we don't think that we're doing anything bad. We think we're just reaching out for help. But it's so important to know that there's another person on the other end of that phone. There's somebody who's going through their own stuff. They may just not be ready that day for you to actually reach out to them. And it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do of where they are. So I think finding the right people is super important, especially when it comes to counselors, therapists, groups, things like that that are actually supporting your process. And I think this is actually really helpful because when we realize that other people are also going through their stuff and we start to actually be considerate of what they need as well, even as we're going through our own pain, it actually, I think, loosens some of the feelings inside of us because suddenly it's not all about us. Suddenly there's another person on the end of the phone. But I think it's super important. Pick the right people. Make sure that you have the agreement essentially in place that we are going to be talking about some difficult stuff, and are you okay with that? And then again, like you said, doing it over and over and over and over again until you feel better. And by the way, for me, I've been doing this for 5 years. It's not a month, it's not a week, it's not a day, it's not a one-time thing. It's a muscle that you learn how to flex, I think, over time.
A really good point. It is interesting. When you first contacted me and we chatted, I knew that there was a backstory there, and it's very interesting to me how some folks work their way through a problem to try to help everybody, and which brings us to Tethr in some ways, and a little bit about understanding not just the operational piece, but the whole product, the whole idea really comes from a place of lived experience, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think I would be a pretty shitty founder and CEO if I hadn't gone through this in some way. I'm a big fan of hypnotherapy, actually, personally. I think that it's a remarkable tool for accessing aspects of your subconscious and actually working with them and playing with them, changing old memories. I know there's a lot of efficacy. Mostly when people think of hypnosis, they think of quitting smoking, but there's so much more to it than that. And I was working with this woman who lives in San Francisco, actually. I have always been like, why do I have to go through all of this crap? Why do I have to feel all of this? I just want it to go away. I've done all of these things. Nothing seems to be working. I keep having to work through these uncomfortable feelings on a day-to-day basis. And it's interesting because it's like I would always do a treatment. And then as soon as like a bit of fear, a bit of anxiety started to come back, I was like, well, that's not supposed to be there. The treatment was supposed to fix that. So why am I feeling this now? And then I would go again into that fight, flight, or freeze thing. So it was this unwillingness to actually sit with pain and sit with discomfort and sit with all of this stuff. But what I found especially, actually, this process has been massively accelerated for me during quarantine and coronavirus, because you just can't hide from your shit anymore, right? Everybody thinks that the enemy's kind of out there. It's like, no. It's in the apartment with you and it's looking at you in the mirror, right? So this virus is really forcing us to confront ourselves in a profoundly meaningful way. We used to be able to go out and run, go to the gym, use Instagram, Netflix. We had all of these mechanisms in place that we could use to, push away those uncomfortable feelings. But now we're actually confronting it. And so I think from my lived experience, like I have to actually do the work that I am telling other people to do in order to actually have any credibility at all. Otherwise, I'm just a shell, right? Otherwise, I don't resonate with people. If I can't tell you about, standing on a balcony and considering whether I should jump off or not, how is somebody in that situation ever going to resonate with me when I talk about anything related to like the depths of despair and all of that kind of stuff? Now, I have a choice. I know I have a choice as to whether I go back to that place or not. And I think that's why the universe didn't really make it easy for me to go through this process, and why I had to continue hitting my head and bumping my toe against the same things in my apartment over and over and over again. Otherwise, I wouldn't have learned that lesson on a deep level. I wouldn't be able to transmit that lesson. Today, I mean, I'm not always like this, but today I'm actually grateful for having this pain, because I think it's through transmuting that pain within myself that I can actually offer a solution and something meaningful that can help people do it for themselves, right? I actually don't want to be the person that does it for you. I want you to know that you have all of that ability to go within and provide those things for yourself. And I think that's where the most profound amount of healing goes. But yeah, the wounded healer it's an archetype for a reason. And I think the most effective therapists, healers, energy workers, people generally that I've met are people that have gone through profound trauma or profound emotional pain, or have dealt with suicidality, have dealt with depression. If I can even, lend that out, is like your pain does have a purpose. Right? It's not there for no reason. It's there to teach you. It's there to help you grow. And it feels uncomfortable and it feels unbearable now. And I know that. And I know you just want to get it away. But as we start to become friends with it and actually become a little bit curious about that pain, it's really interesting, the transformation that can happen.